The wind howls low across the quiet hills of Point Pleasant. Somewhere out beyond the tree line, a pair of glowing red eyes watches, silent, waiting. Tonight, as sleep begins to take hold, we journey into the foggy space between folklore and fear. If you're listening under moonlight or nestled in the quiet of your room, feel free to share your setting in the comments. These stories take on new life when we hear where they're being dreamt. This is the tale of the Mothman, a creature of wings and whispers, whose legend continues to flicker in the shadows of modern memory. Settle in, breathe deep, and let your thoughts drift into the unknown. Welcome to Fairytales After Dark. In the waning light of 1966, when televisions hummed with static and the moon hung low over the Ohio River, something strange stirred in the quiet corners of West Virginia. It was November. Cold enough to see your breath, but not yet winter. In Point Pleasant, a small town resting at the meeting of river and road, life moved slowly. Evenings were quiet. Nights were darker than most places remember now. Just outside town stood the old TNT plant, a forgotten remnant of war. Concrete domes scattered through the woods like half-buried bones. Nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines climbing steel, trees growing where soldiers once stood watch. It was there that two young couples drove late one night. What they saw would not fit neatly into words. They described a tall shape, neither bird nor man. Wings folded tight against a dark body, and eyes, glowing red, unblinking, reflecting the headlights like burning coals. When the creature lifted into the air, it did not flap like a bird. It rose smoothly, silently. Then it followed their car. They drove faster. The thing kept pace. When they reached town, breath shaking, hands trembling, they told the sheriff what they had seen. He listened, wrote it down. Likely assumed fear had filled in the gaps where certainty should have been. But they were not the last. Within days, others came forward. Hunters, drivers, people who swore they saw something standing at the edge of fields, perched atop power lines or rising from the trees without sound. The newspapers took hold of the story, and in giving it a name, they gave it life. The Mothman. Point Pleasant, before the stories, was an unassuming place. A river town shaped slowly by water and time, where the Ohio River curved without urgency, and the land seemed content to remain as it was. Mornings arrived quietly, without drama, and evenings settled in with the same gentle certainty. Nothing rushed here. Nothing demanded attention. Life moved at a human pace. People woke with the light, worked with their hands, and returned home when the air cooled enough to suggest the day was finished. There were routines that repeated themselves so faithfully they barely registered as habits. The rhythm of daily life felt dependable, almost protective, as though tomorrow was already waiting, familiar and unchanged. Porches were places of rest. Front yards were places of conversation. Footsteps on gravel were familiar enough to be recognized by sound alone. Even engines passing down the road carried distinct voices, each belonging to someone known. In a town like this, anonymity rarely lingered. At night, darkness arrived fully. Not the softened darkness we know now, diluted by constant glow, but real night. The kind that settles into fields and corners, where stars feel close and silence feels present rather than empty. When lights went out, the dark remained, patient and complete. It was the kind of town where change was not expected to arrive suddenly. Just beyond the edge of that quiet certainty, past the last streetlight and the final stretch of pavement, stood the old TNT area. Concrete domes, low and rounded, were scattered through the woods like thoughts left unfinished. They rested among the trees without ceremony. Their purpose no longer announced, their presence no longer questioned. Once, these structures had been built with urgency. During the war years, they were designed to store materials meant for destruction, to contain danger behind steel doors and strict procedure. Voices echoed there once, machinery hummed, men moved with purpose, aware that every task carried weight. Then, the war ended. The urgency vanished. The reason for the place to exist dissolved quietly, without a formal goodbye. What remained was infrastructure without intention, a shell waiting for meaning that never returned. Nature, unbothered by timelines or memory, began the slow work of reclaiming. Cracks widened, roots pressed through concrete, water pooled where it was never meant to gather. Rust spread gently, as though even decay here preferred not to hurry. Trees leaned where guard posts once stood. Vines traced the outlines of concrete. Deer moved freely through spaces that had once been restricted by purpose and authority. The land did not erase the past, but it softened it, reshaping sharp edges into something quieter. No one went there for long, not because it was forbidden, and not because it was especially dangerous. It simply felt finished. A place where human intention had stopped, but the land had not. Places like that carry a certain weight. They remember being used and being left behind. They hold silence differently. Over time, the TNT area became something people spoke of only indirectly. A place mentioned in passing, never lingered on. Children dared one another to drive near it at night, but few stayed. Adults avoided it without quite knowing why. It was easier to let it remain on the edge of awareness, neither gone nor truly present. And yet, places that exist in this in-between state tend to gather meaning. When intention leaves, imagination moves in. When certainty fades, interpretation takes root. When people pass through places like that, especially at night, they bring their inner weather with them. They bring memory, expectation, and the quiet tension of being somewhere unfinished. Sometimes they bring nothing more than fatigue and distraction, and sometimes they see something they cannot explain. The first witnesses did not go looking for mystery. They were driving, talking, passing time. Headlights cut through the dark, briefly illuminating trees, concrete shapes, shadows that retreated as quickly as they appeared. The road was familiar enough to be ignored, the drive ordinary enough to feel safe. Then something did not retreat. A shape stood ahead, tall and still, as though it had always been there. Not a bird, not a man. Something held together by outline more than detail, its form difficult to place yet unmistakably present. And then the eyes. Red, reflective, catching the headlights in a way that felt deliberate. Not glowing on their own, but responding as though aware of being seen. When the shape moved, it did not startle. It did not scatter. It unfolded. Wings opened, broad and silent, stretching outward without effort. There was no frantic motion, no sound of feathers or air. It rose smoothly, calmly, as though gravity had simply agreed to let it go. The car accelerated. The thing kept pace. Witnesses later said the most unsettling part was not fear, but the absence of it. They did not feel chased. They felt observed, as though something had noticed them and was calmly deciding what to do next. When they reached town, voices shaking and hands unsteady, they told what they had seen. The sheriff listened. He wrote it down. Assumptions were made quietly. Darkness can deceive. Adrenaline can reshape memory. Fear can fill in gaps where certainty should be. But then others came forward. Hunters, accustomed to the woods, used to knowing what belonged there and what did not. Drivers alone on back roads who swore they saw wings stretch against the sky, broad and still, cutting across the stars without sound. People with no reason to invent a story and no desire to be part of one. The descriptions were strikingly similar. The height, the stillness, the wings, and always the eyes. Red, unblinking, not hostile but present. No claws were ever mentioned, no snapping jaws, no sound, just form and attention. What unsettled the town was not the strangeness of the creature, but the consistency of the accounts. Different people, different nights, different places, the same details, the same quiet certainty that something had been there and had chosen not to intervene. Fear settled into Point Pleasant slowly, not as panic, but as a subtle shift. Doors locked a little earlier, lights stayed on a little longer, conversations paused before dismissing what had been heard. The town breathed differently, as though aware that something had changed, even if it could not yet be named. Days passed, then weeks. The river flowed on, unconcerned with rumor. Life continued, because life always does. But beneath routine, a tension remained, quiet and unresolved. Something had stepped into the edges of awareness and refused to leave entirely. And somewhere beyond the last streetlight, among concrete domes and quiet trees, something remained unseen. Not moving. Not advancing. Watching. The watching did not feel hostile. It did not feel urgent. It felt patient, as though whatever lingered there was not concerned with being noticed or feared or understood. It simply remained. Days passed after the first reports, and then more days still. Morning followed morning, each one arriving with the same pale light over the river, the same chill in the air, the same sense that life should continue as it always had. And on the surface it did. Shops opened. Cars crossed familiar roads. Conversations returned to ordinary things. But underneath that routine, something subtle had shifted. People listened more carefully at night. They paused before stepping outside. They looked a little longer at the tree line before turning away. Fear had not announced itself. It had settled. In small towns, changes in mood travel faster than news. A look held a fraction too long. A voice lowered without explanation. A story retold carefully, with the sharp edges sanded down, as if gentleness might make it safer to carry. No one wanted to exaggerate what they did not fully understand. No one wanted to be the one who sounded foolish. So the story of the thing near the TNT area spread slowly, almost politely. It passed from neighbor to neighbor, from porch to porch, from one quiet kitchen to another. Each telling added nothing new, but removed nothing either. The shape remained tall. The wings remained wide. The eyes remained red. Always the eyes. People disagreed on what it meant. Some said it was an owl, seen in poor light, imagination filling in the rest. Others said it was something military, a test that had gone wrong, an explanation rooted safely in human error. And some said nothing at all, choosing silence over speculation. Yet even those who dismissed the story found themselves thinking about it later, alone, when the house was quiet and the windows reflected darkness back at them. Because the reports did not sound like panic. They sounded like certainty. More sightings followed. Not every night, and not always near the TNT area. A figure seen standing at the edge of a field. Something perched high above the ground, silhouetted against the sky. A sense of being watched while driving, the mirror catching a shape that disappeared when looked at directly. No one reported being attacked. No one reported being touched. The creature did not chase people down, did not cry out, did not leave marks behind. It appeared, lingered, and then was gone, as if presence alone were the point. This unsettled people more than any act of aggression could have. There was nothing to fight, nothing to escape from, only the awareness that something had been there, aware in return. And so, without meaning to, the town adjusted. Lights were left on through the night. Doors were locked earlier, not out of fear exactly, but out of caution that could not quite be explained. Dogs were called inside sooner. Children were warned, gently, to stay close after dark. The town did not panic. It adapted. Then there were the men. They did not arrive all at once, and they did not announce themselves. They appeared individually at different times, asking questions that felt slightly out of place. They wore dark coats, regardless of the weather, and spoke in voices that were calm but oddly flat, as though emotion were something they had learned rather than felt. They asked about sightings, about times, about feelings. Some forgot names moments after hearing them. Others struggled with simple details as if unfamiliar with ordinary conversation. A few stared too intently, blinking less than seemed natural, their expressions fixed somewhere between curiosity and confusion. They were polite, they were unsettling, and then, just as quietly as they had arrived, they left. No explanation followed. No answers came with them. Only the lingering impression that whatever was happening had drawn attention from somewhere beyond the town itself. That attention, too, felt like watching. As autumn faded toward winter, the air grew colder, and the leaves fell away from the trees. The landscape changed, opening itself up, revealing more of what had been hidden by green. The concrete domes of the TNT area became more visible through the bare branches. Paths that had been obscured all summer lay exposed. The sightings continued, though they seemed to spread out in time. Less frequent, but no less vivid. Each one felt like a punctuation mark, rather than a sentence, brief and deliberate. People began to wonder not just what the creature was, but why it appeared when it did. Why it chose certain moments, certain places. Why it did nothing more than be seen. Speculation drifted in many directions. Some spoke of omens, of warnings meant to be heeded. Others spoke of coincidence, of tragedy waiting for meaning to attach itself. And some, quieter than the rest, wondered if the creature was not pointing toward anything at all, but simply existing alongside the town, aware of something the people were not yet ready to notice. December arrived without ceremony. Cold settled into the ground, hardening the earth, sharpening the air. Mornings came later, evenings arrived earlier. The river moved more slowly, heavy and dark beneath the low winter sky. Life continued. Cars crossed the Silver Bridge each day, carrying workers home, carrying families across the river, carrying the weight of routine and trust. The bridge had always been there. It had never given reason to be doubted, and so it was not doubted. In the days leading up to December 15th, nothing felt particularly different. No alarm sounded, no final warning came. The town breathed, lived, waited, without knowing it was waiting at all. When the bridge failed, it failed completely. Steel gave way. Structure collapsed. The ordinary motion of traffic was interrupted by noise, by violence, by sudden absence where certainty had been. Cars fell into the freezing river below. Headlights vanished beneath the surface. Voices were swallowed by water and distance. 46 lives were lost. Later, engineers would find the cause. A single flaw, a hidden weakness, a small point of failure that had gone unnoticed for years. There would be reports, diagrams, explanations precise enough to satisfy reason. But reason does not always soothe memory. For those who lived in Point Pleasant, the timing felt heavy. Too close, too aligned with what had come before, too neatly placed beside the stories of wings and red eyes and quiet watching. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone. No more sightings followed the collapse. No shapes against the sky. No sense of being observed. The nights returned to stillness, but it was a different stillness now, shaped by loss. Some felt relief, others felt unease. If the Mothman had been a warning, had it been ignored? If it had been a witness, had its role been fulfilled? The questions lingered, unanswered, drifting through the years that followed. Over time, the story left Point Pleasant, carried outward by books, by articles, by retellings that bent and reshaped it. Similar figures were reported elsewhere, always near moments of upheaval, always fleeting, always silent. The legend stretched beyond its origin, becoming less about one town and more about a pattern people felt they recognized. Across cultures, there are stories of watchers, beings that appear not to intervene, but to observe moments of transition. They stand at thresholds, at the edge between what was and what will be. They do not cause change, they mark it. Perhaps the Mothman belongs to that older tradition. Not a monster, not a messenger, but a presence that emerges when balance begins to shift. In time, fear softened. Point Pleasant found a way to carry its story without being consumed by it. A statue was raised, wings spread wide, eyes glowing red in polished metal. Festivals followed. Visitors came. Children laughed and posed for photographs beneath a legend that had once unsettled an entire town. Some said this proved the story had never been real. Others said it proved the opposite, that even fear, when held long enough, becomes part of identity. Folklore does not disappear. It adapts. What once frightened us may later comfort us. What once warned us may later remind us that we endured. And now, as your thoughts slow and the night deepens, the story loosens its grip. The watching fades into memory, into symbol, into the quiet space where stories go when they are no longer needed to stay awake. If wings pass through your imagination tonight, let them pass gently. If red eyes flicker at the edge of thought, Let them dim. Perhaps it is only the land remembering. Perhaps it is only a story doing what stories have always done, keeping watch while we rest. Settle in, breathe deep, and let your thoughts drift into the unknown. This has been Fairy Tales After Dark.